The selection ceremony was supposed to be a celebration. 8 months working with the Vel'karian Empire had taught Marcus Webb that their grand ceremonies were always elaborate, bioluminescent displays that turned the imperial halls into living art, complex social rituals that carried layers of meaning in every gesture. But today's ceremony felt different. There was tension beneath the beauty, discomfort hidden under the formal proceedings. Marcus stood among the other diplomatic observers, watching as Princess Sylara Vel'mor was presented to the assembled noble houses. She was striking, silver-blue scales that would normally shimmer with bioluminescent patterns, long ears swept back and adorned with simple but elegant jewelry, violet eyes that held carefully controlled emotion. But her scales remained dark, no shimmer, no patterns, no bioluminescent display. Marcus had learned enough about Vel'karian culture to understand what that meant. Bioluminescence was their primary communication, complex patterns and colors that conveyed emotion, intention, and complex ideas with nuance that verbal speech couldn't match. It was art, language, and social hierarchy combined. Princess Sylara couldn't produce those displays. Genetic silence, they called it, a rare condition that left her scales dark and non-responsive. To her people, she was functionally mute in the way that mattered most. The ceremony proceeded with formal precision. The first consort announced, "Noble houses of the Vel'karian Empire, Princess Sylara Vel'mor is presented for consideration." Those who would offer alliance stepped forward. The first noble, House Kelvar, one of the Empire's most powerful families, approached. Their representative looked at Sylara with barely concealed disdain. His scales flickered with patterns Marcus couldn't fully read, but he'd learned enough to catch the meaning. Rejection, dismissal, the visual equivalent of contempt. The representative spoke aloud for the benefit of those who couldn't read light language. House Kelvar respectfully declines. The bloodline must remain pure in all respects. Sylara's expression didn't change. She stood perfectly still, accepting the rejection with composure that Marcus recognized as practice, something she'd learned to do many times before. The second house approached, then the third, each assessment, each rejection delivered with varying degrees of cruelty. A princess who cannot speak in light is no princess at all. Our house cannot accept such profound genetic weakness. The inability to communicate as Vel'karians should is disqualifying. Marcus watched Sylara's careful control. Most people wouldn't notice. She maintained perfect posture, her face composed. But he'd spent 8 months learning to read subtle cues across species, and he saw what others missed. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched briefly before she forced them to relax, the micro-expression of pain before she reasserted her mask. She was being systematically humiliated in front of her entire court, and there was nothing she could do but stand there and take it. The emperor and empress sat on their thrones, their own bioluminescent patterns subdued with what Marcus's cultural training identified as profound discomfort. They couldn't intervene without making it worse. Acknowledging the humiliation would only deepen it. When the 12th and final noble house rejected her, House Vel'karian respectfully declines consideration. The hall fell into uncomfortable silence. The ceremony had failed, completely. Not a single house had accepted the princess. The first consort looked stricken, clearly unprepared for total rejection. The emperor rose, probably to make some face-saving announcement that would end this disaster with minimal additional damage. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He stepped forward from the diplomatic section. Completely inappropriate. He wasn't noble, wasn't Vel'karian, wasn't even formally part of the ceremony. Multiple people made sounds of surprise. Guards shifted positions, uncertain if this was a security threat. Marcus walked across the grand hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He could feel everyone watching, confusion, shock, some hostility. He reached Princess Sylara, who looked at him with surprise breaking through her careful composure, and he knelt, not the formal bow that protocol demanded. An actual kneel, one knee on the ground, head bowed, a position that placed him completely at her mercy. The court erupted, gasps, shocked bioluminescent flashes, the sound of people rising from their seats. Marcus knew what kneeling meant in Vel'karian culture. He'd studied it extensively. It was sacred, reserved for moments of profound reverence. You knelt to dying parents, to those who saved your life, to express devotion so complete that you placed yourself entirely at another's mercy. You didn't kneel casually. You didn't kneel for politics. You knelt because someone's worth demanded it from your soul. He just declared, in the most profound way their culture recognized, that Princess Sylara was worthy of absolute devotion. The emperor was standing now. The empress looked shocked. The nobles who'd rejected Sylara looked outraged. How dare this human presume to judge what they'd dismissed? Marcus looked up, meeting Sylara's violet eyes. He spoke in carefully practiced Vel'karian. "Your Highness, I cannot offer noble bloodline or political advantage. I cannot speak in light as your people do. But I offer genuine respect, freely given, because you have shown more strength and dignity in silence than all the light speakers in this hall have shown with their cruelty." He stayed kneeling, waiting. The court held its breath. Princess Sylara stared down at him, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of tears before she controlled it. When she spoke, her voice, rarely used in public because verbal speech was considered crude, was clear and steady despite the emotion underneath. "Rise, Marcus Webb of Earth. You have honored me with truth when others offered only judgment. I accept your respect and return it with my own." She extended her hand, the gesture of acceptance in Vel'karian culture. Marcus took it and rose, still holding her hand in a way that would have been improper under normal circumstances, but that the sacred nature of the kneeling made permissible. The court was in chaos, but for a moment, in the center of it all, Marcus and Sylara just looked at each other, a human who'd seen worth where others saw worthlessness, and a princess who just experienced genuine respect for the first time in her life. The political fallout was immediate and complex. Marcus was summoned before the emperor and empress within hours of the ceremony. He stood in the private audience chamber while Vel'karian nobility debated his fate in rapid light patterns he could only partially follow. Emperor Vel'mor finally addressed him directly. "Marcus Webb, you understand what kneeling means in our culture." "Yes, Your Majesty. It's a sacred gesture of profound reverence and devotion, reserved for moments when someone's worth demands recognition beyond normal expression. And you felt my daughter warranted such gesture." There was something careful in the emperor's tone. He was testing, trying to understand. "I felt your daughter showed extraordinary strength and dignity while being systematically rejected by people who should have protected her. That warranted acknowledgement, respect, reverence even." Marcus kept his voice steady. "I meant no disrespect to your court, but I couldn't watch that humiliation continue without responding." The empress spoke, her bioluminescent patterns subdued. "You are aware that by accepting your gesture, Sylara has created a bond. In our culture, when someone kneels and the gesture is accepted, a connection is formed that carries significant obligations." "I'm aware, Your Majesty." "And you're prepared for the consequences. Political complications, social scrutiny, the reality of being bonded to someone our own nobility deemed unworthy." Marcus met her eyes directly. "With respect, Your Majesty, I don't believe your daughter is unworthy. I believe your nobility measured her by a single standard and missed everything else that makes her valuable. If accepting those consequences means standing by that truth, then yes, I'm prepared." The emperor and empress exchanged a long look, some communication in light language that Marcus couldn't read. Finally, the emperor spoke. "The bond stands. We will not invalidate a sacred gesture, regardless of political complications. But you should understand, this will not be easy for either of you." Over the following days, Marcus learned exactly what that meant. Conservative nobles were furious, viewing his gesture as foreign interference and implicit criticism. They couldn't attack the kneeling itself. That would be dishonoring their own sacred traditions. But they could make their displeasure known in countless subtle ways. Progressive factions were cautiously supportive, seeing it as challenge to the narrow genetic standards that had marginalized Sylara. And everyone was watching to see what would happen next. Marcus and Sylara were given formal time to actually get to know each other. The bond created by his kneeling required they understand whether it would deepen into something more permanent or remain as respectful acknowledgement. They met in palace gardens away from the court's constant scrutiny. "Why did you really do it?" Sylara asked after their third meeting. "You barely know me. You risked significant political consequences. Why?" Marcus considered how to explain it. "I've spent 8 months learning your culture, learning to read the subtle things, body language, micro-expressions, the things that matter when you can't rely on bioluminescent communication." He looked at her directly. "During that ceremony, I watched you. Everyone else was focused on your scales, on what you couldn't do, but I saw what you were doing. Which was maintaining dignity while being publicly humiliated. Standing strong while people who should have valued you instead judged you. Showing more grace under pressure than any of those nobles showed in their entire performance." He paused. "You've spent your whole life being told you're less than others because you can't produce bioluminescent displays. But I saw someone who developed other strengths: observation, resilience, the ability to carry pain without letting it break you. That deserved respect, real respect, not political calculation." Sylara was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "No one has ever described my silence as strength before, only as lack, as broken biology that makes me less than what I should be." "Then your people are fools who measure worth by a single dimension and miss everything else." Marcus said it matter-of-factly. "You're not less than them, you're different. And from what I've seen, you've developed capabilities they haven't needed to because their light language came easily." "What capabilities?" "Reading people without relying on bioluminescence. Understanding verbal nuance that light speakers often miss because they're so focused on patterns. Empathy developed from understanding what it's like to be dismissed." He gestured around the gardens. "You've learned to be extraordinary in ways your culture doesn't value. That's not a deficit. That's adaptive intelligence." Sylara looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You really believe that?" "I do, because I've been watching you for months, long before the ceremony." He admitted it honestly. "I was curious about the princess who attended every diplomatic function but rarely spoke, who observed everything but participated minimally. I wondered why. Then I learned about genetic silence and understood. But I also noticed that you caught things others missed, read situations accurately, understood cross-cultural dynamics that confused your own diplomats." "You noticed me." She seemed genuinely surprised. "How could I not? You were the most interesting person in the room, even when you were trying to be invisible." Something shifted between them, a connection forming not from obligation or political calculation, but from genuine recognition. For Sylara, being seen for who she was rather than what she lacked was transformative. For Marcus, watching her realize her own worth was more rewarding than any diplomatic success he'd achieved. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Sylara spent increasing time together. The bond created by his kneeling gave them legitimate reason to interact, and they used it to genuinely get to know each other. Sylara taught him deeper nuances of Vel'karian culture, the things that weren't in the diplomatic briefings. How bioluminescent patterns worked, what different colors meant, the social dynamics he'd been missing without light language literacy. Marcus taught her about Earth cultures, about human philosophy, about the value placed on verbal communication and written language in ways that made her own strengths feel less like deficits. But they also just talked. About their lives, their experiences, their perspectives. "I grew up knowing I was broken," Sylara told him one evening. "My parents tried to be supportive, but I could see the disappointment. My siblings developed elaborate displays while mine remained dark. The court physicians tried everything: genetic therapy, experimental treatments. Nothing worked. How did that feel? Like being constantly told you're not enough, that your existence is a problem to be fixed. She was quiet. I learned to be quiet in other ways too, to not draw attention, to make myself small and unobtrusive because that was easier than being the visible disappointment. That ceremony, was it the first time you'd been formally rejected? No, there were smaller ceremonies, private meetings with potential matches. Each one ended the same way. Her voice held old pain. This was just the most public version. The final confirmation that no one would accept me. Marcus felt anger on her behalf. Your people are idiots. She laughed, startled and genuine. You can't say that about the Vel'karian nobility. I just did. They're idiots who measure worth by a single biological trait and miss everything else. He looked at her seriously. You're brilliant, Sylara. Your analysis of the trade negotiations last week was better than anything your official diplomats produced. Your understanding of human Vel'karian cultural differences is exceptional. Your ability to read situations and people is remarkable. None of that requires bioluminescence, but it's all valuable. You see me very differently than my own people do. I see you accurately, they see you through prejudice. The connection between them deepened. Not romantic exactly, neither of them was looking for that, but something genuine and mutual. Respect that had grown into friendship, partnership even. But not everyone was pleased by their growing bond. The crisis came when House Kelvar, the first house to reject Sylara, formally challenged the validity of Marcus's kneeling. They petitioned the imperial court for an inquiry, arguing that a human couldn't truly understand Vel'karian culture, and therefore his gesture was ignorant mimicry rather than genuine reverence. They want to invalidate the bond, Sylara told Marcus, her voice tight with stress. Claim your kneeling was meaningless because you're human. Can they do that? If the court rules that you didn't understand what you were doing, yes. The gesture would be dismissed as cultural ignorance. She looked at him with worry. They'll question you, publicly, try to prove you don't understand our traditions. Then I'll prove I do. Marcus said it with more confidence than he felt. I studied your culture for months specifically because I wanted to understand it properly. I knew what kneeling meant when I did it. They won't make it easy. I didn't expect easy when I stepped onto that floor. The inquiry was held in the Grand Hall, the same place where the selection ceremony had occurred. Marcus stood before a panel of senior nobles, with the Emperor and Empress presiding and the entire court watching. Lord Kelvar himself led the questioning. Marcus Webb, you claim to understand Vel'karian culture. Explain to this court what kneeling signifies. Marcus spoke clearly. Kneeling is a sacred gesture reserved for moments of profound reverence. You kneel when someone's worth is so profound that normal expressions of respect are insufficient. When their character, sacrifice, or essence demands recognition beyond words, even light words. It's not done lightly. It's done when you see something in another person that humbles you with its depth. And you felt the princess warranted such reverence. Yes. Based on what? You barely knew her. You're human. You can't even read our primary form of communication. How could you possibly judge her worthy of our culture's most sacred gesture? Marcus met Lord Kelvar's eyes directly. I watched her stand with dignity while being systematically rejected by people too blind to recognize her worth. I saw strength in her silence, intelligence in her observation, and grace under humiliation that would have broken lesser people. That moved me to reverence. You saw strength in genetic deficiency. I saw strength in how she's adapted to a culture that measures worth by standards she can't meet. I saw intelligence in the skills she's developed precisely because she couldn't rely on bioluminescence. I saw dignity in enduring dismissal without losing herself. Marcus's voice was steady. If your culture's sacred gesture means what you claim it means, If kneeling is for recognizing profound worth, then it was appropriate. If it doesn't, then perhaps you should examine whether you truly understand your own traditions. The hall went silent. Lord Kelvar looked furious. Several other nobles had expressions of shock. Emperor Vel'mor rose from his throne. The human understood our tradition better than those questioning him. He recognized worth where we had failed to see it. Perhaps that is the actual foreign contamination we should fear, outsiders seeing value in our own people that we're too prejudiced to recognize. He looked around the assembled court. The gesture stands. The bond is legitimate. This inquiry is concluded. The emperor's ruling silenced the opposition, but didn't eliminate it. The political factions remained divided, and Marcus and Sylara remained at the center of court scrutiny. But something had shifted. The inquiry had forced the court to actually examine their own prejudices. Not everyone changed their minds, but some began questioning whether genetic silence really did make someone worthless. Sylara herself seemed transformed, not in her capabilities, those had always been present, but in her willingness to let them be seen. "I spent my whole life trying to be invisible," she told Marcus, "trying not to draw attention to my deficiency, but you've made invisibility impossible. Is that bad?" "I'm not sure yet." She smiled slightly, "but it's different. And maybe different is what I needed." They began working together officially. The emperor, recognizing the political value of the bond whether he'd wanted it or not, assigned them to joint diplomatic initiatives. Sylara's expertise in reading people and understanding cross-cultural dynamics, combined with Marcus's human perspective and genuine respect for her abilities, made them surprisingly effective. The Vel'karian nobility watched as the princess they dismissed became one of the empire's most successful diplomats. Some grudgingly acknowledged her value. Others remained convinced she was broken despite evidence otherwise. Months later, at another formal ceremony, Marcus and Sylara stood together while the emperor publicly acknowledged their partnership, not marriage, which would have required far more complex negotiations, but the formal bond created by Marcus's kneeling and Sylara's acceptance. Afterward in private, Sylara asked Marcus something she'd been thinking about. "Do you ever regret it? Kneeling. You've been drawn into our political chaos, subjected to scrutiny, forced to defend yourself repeatedly." "No." He said it without hesitation. "I did what felt right, what felt necessary. The complications were inevitable, but that doesn't make the gesture wrong. Why does it matter so much to you? My worth, I mean." Marcus thought about how to explain it. "Because I've watched brilliant people be dismissed for arbitrary reasons my entire life. Watched talent ignored because it didn't fit narrow definitions. Watched strength dismissed as weakness by people too limited to recognize it." He looked at her. "You're not the first person I've seen undervalued, but you're the first time I had the opportunity to do something about it publicly. That ceremony, it was cruel and unjust. Stepping forward felt like the only appropriate response." Sylara was quiet for a moment. Then, "You changed my life. You know that, right? Not by fixing me, I'm not broken. But by seeing me when I'd learned to be invisible. By valuing what my own people dismissed. That changes how I see myself. You changed yourself. I just refused to accept your court's judgment of you." That was enough. That was everything. She smiled. "Thank you for kneeling, for seeing worth where others saw worthlessness, for proving that genuine respect matters more than status or political calculation." When asked about their bond, Sylara would explain. "He saw me when I had learned to be invisible. He recognized worth in what my people called worthlessness. He knelt not because I was a princess, but because he genuinely respected who I am. That changed everything, not because it fixed me, but because I was never broken. I just needed someone to see that." And Marcus, when asked why he'd risked everything to kneel before a princess his own people barely knew, would say, "Because genuine respect isn't about status or political calculation. It's about recognizing true worth when you see it and honoring it regardless of cost." She was surrounded by people measuring her by standards she couldn't meet. I measured her by different standards: character, intelligence, strength, and found her extraordinary. Kneeling was the only appropriate response. The nobles who'd rejected her were forced to watch, as Princess Sylara became one of the Vel'karian Empire's most effective diplomats. Her partnership with